The building was always too quiet at night. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, but the kind that makes your own breathing sound too loud. It was one of those glass and steel corporate towers downtown, the kind that looked alive during the day, buzzing with hundreds of people in suits, screens glowing behind every window. But at night, it was just a shell. Just concrete and air conditioning, and that hum that fills every empty hallway when the world's asleep. Ethan, that was the guard's name, had been working security there for almost 3 years. His shift ran from midnight to 6. He liked it quiet. That's what he always said. Less talking, less hassle, just the occasional janitor passing through. But lately, the building had started to feel off. It began with the alerts. Every night, around 3:11 a.m., the elevator in the South Tower would open by itself. The doors would slide apart with a dull metallic click, even though there was no one inside, and no one called it. At first, Ethan thought it was a glitch. Elevators were old. Sometimes the sensors misfired, maybe a short circuit in the motion system. But it wasn't just once, it was every night. Same elevator, same time. 3:11 a.m., he checked the logs the first time he noticed it. Sure enough, the system recorded a call from the lobby level at 3:11, but no corresponding button press. The panel light never activated. The doors just opened, waited, and closed again. The weirdest part? That elevator didn't have a camera inside. Every other corner of the building did. Every hallway, every stairwell, even the parking levels. But for some reason, the elevator interior was a blind spot. Always had been. So when the doors opened, all Ethan could see was the empty hallway beyond it, or the dull gray interior through the small window of the outer camera. Sometimes the light inside flickered, almost like someone was standing under it, moving slightly, but he couldn't be sure. He brushed it off. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't want to sound like one of those guards who start hearing voices or seeing ghosts after too many long nights. But after the third night, he started keeping track. He wrote the times down in his notebook. 3:11 a.m., south elevator opened. 3:12 a.m., doors closed, every night for 6 nights straight. By the 7th, he was ready for it. He sat in the control room, just him, the hum of the monitors, and the radio on his shoulder, watching the clock on the wall. 3:09, 3:10. He leaned forward, eyes locked on the south hallway feed. The doors slid open. Nothing came out, but for the first time, he thought he saw something move inside. Not a shape, more like the shadow of one. The lights in the hallway dimmed slightly when it happened, just enough for him to notice the color shift on the monitor. Then, the feed cut to static for half a second. When it came back, the doors were closed. He leaned back slowly, skin prickling. The entire room felt colder. He checked the temperature monitor on the wall, a small digital display they used for fire safety. The reading had dropped 4 degrees. The next morning, he mentioned it casually to one of the daytime guards. The guy just shrugged and said, "Yeah, that thing's been doing that for years. Nobody knows why." Maintenance looked at it, said the motor's fine. "Just ignore it, man." But Ethan couldn't. He had to see for himself. That night, he decided he'd wait for it in person. He brewed a cup of burnt coffee, grabbed his flashlight, and made his way through the south corridor. The elevator was on standby at the lobby level. Quiet, still, with its little down button glowing faint orange in the dim light. He looked at his watch. 3:09. 2 minutes. The hall buzzed faintly with the sound of fluorescent lights. The air felt heavy, the way it does before a storm, though it wasn't raining. He stood directly in front of the elevator doors, watching his reflection warp slightly in the brushed metal. 3:10. A quiet ding echoed from somewhere deep inside the shaft. Then, the faint hum of motion. The display above the door flickered, B1L, then blank. 3:11. The doors slid open. A rush of cold air poured out, brushing across his face. The light inside the elevator flickered violently, just for a second. It was empty. He stepped closer, flashlight beam bouncing off the mirrored interior. The air inside smelled faintly metallic, like rain on steel. He leaned in just enough to see the far corner. Nothing. Then the lights in the hallway dimmed again. Not completely, just enough that he noticed. His radio crackled once, a faint hiss of static. He froze. The elevator doors closed softly in front of him. No button pressed. The hum faded. Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at his reflection in the steel, his own pulse echoing in his ears. Then he stepped back and made his way to the control room. When he rewound the footage later, his stomach turned cold. The feed cut out the moment the doors opened, exactly at 3:11. When the video came back online, the doors were closed again, and he was standing in the same spot. Only this time, his reflection in the elevator's surface looked different. The angle of his shoulders was wrong. His head was tilted slightly, like he was staring at something over his own shoulder. Something just behind him. Ethan didn't sleep that morning. He drove home with the radio off, replaying the flicker of that elevator in his mind. He'd seen strange things before. Power surges, bad wiring, cheap motion sensors that triggered from nothing. But this felt different. He kept seeing that frame in his head. The reflection that wasn't quite his. The way it leaned just slightly, like it was listening. By the next shift, he'd convinced himself he'd imagined it. Fatigue, caffeine, and fluorescent lights do weird things to your eyes. Still, he couldn't stay away from that hallway. Around 2:30 a.m., he was already at the monitors, watching the South Tower feed. Same sterile hall, same closed doors. He told himself he'd watch one more night, get one clear clip, maybe show the building supervisor, just to prove something was wrong with the wiring. Something technical, something explainable. At 3:09, he got up from his chair and walked down the hall again. His footsteps echoed softly over the polished floor. He could feel the cold spot long before he reached the elevator, a pocket of air that didn't belong in a climate-controlled building. He looked up. The digital floor indicator was off. No numbers, no glow. He pressed the call button anyway. For a second, nothing happened. Then the light flickered once and the doors opened. He expected the hum of machinery, the quiet click of the pulley system. But there was only silence. Silence, and the faintest smell of dust and metal. He stepped inside. The floor vibrated under his boots, subtle but constant, like the building itself was breathing. He glanced at the panel. The buttons for each floor glowed softly, except one. Between B1 and L was a faint scratch where another button used to be. A smooth patch of plastic, like something had been removed. He pressed B1. The doors closed, sealing him in that small metal box. His reflection looked pale in the mirrored wall. Tired eyes, radio clipped to his shoulder, flashlight hanging from his belt. The elevator began to move, a low hum beneath his feet. He watched the numbers descend, L, G, B1. Then it stopped. The display blinked once, then changed. B2. Ethan frowned. There was no B2. He'd seen the building's schematics. One basement, storage, maintenance, boiler room, that's it. But the elevator kept moving. The hum deepened. He felt the pressure shift in his ears, like descending a plane. The lights dimmed to a dull yellow. When it finally stopped, the doors didn't open. He pressed the button again. Nothing. He pressed open door. The motor whined, but the panels stayed shut. Then over the radio, a soft crackle. A single breath. Ethan, he froze. Static hissed for a few seconds, then silence again. He backed away from the doors, heart hammering. Control, you copy? No answer. The elevator lights flickered. For a moment, everything went black. When the lights came back, the doors were open, but it wasn't B1. The hallway outside was concrete, unfinished, like a basement under construction. Bare bulbs hung from wires that disappeared into the ceiling. The air smelled of damp dust and cold iron. He stepped out carefully. The floor was uneven, small puddles of water reflecting the light. There were no signs, no pipes, no access panels, just a narrow corridor that led into darkness. He pulled out his flashlight and shone it down the path. Something metallic glinted in the distance. Maybe a pipe, maybe a door handle. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, a faint whisper threading through the static. Shouldn't be here. He spun around. Nothing. The elevator doors were still open. He stepped backward toward them, keeping his light pointed forward. Then the elevator dinged softly once and the doors began to close. Hey, hold on. He lunged forward, slamming his hand between the panels. They froze halfway, juddering. The hum in the air rose to a low vibration deep in his chest. Through the small gap he could see the interior lights of the elevator flickering, like a strobe too fast to track. And just for a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement inside. Not his reflection. Someone standing at the back of the elevator. The panels snapped shut. He stumbled backward as the hum stopped. The indicator above the doors went dark. Ethan stood in the silence, flashlight trembling in his hand. He called out again, louder this time. "Control, this is Ethan. I'm in the south elevator shaft area. Something's wrong with..." The radio hissed, then died. He tried his phone next. No signal. He wasn't even sure what floor he was on. He looked down the corridor again. The air seemed to shimmer slightly, like heat distortion. And beneath it, he heard something. Footsteps, slow dragging, coming from deeper inside. He backed toward the elevator doors, pressing the button over and over. No response. The footsteps stopped. He aimed the flashlight ahead. At the far end of the hall, half lit by his beam, stood a door. A metal one, dented and streaked with rust. It was shaking slightly. Something was moving on the other side. He whispered to himself, "It's just air pressure. It's nothing." But the shaking grew faster, then stopped. Silence again. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, the sound of his boots echoing through the corridor. When he was about 10 feet away, the door handle turned. Slowly, deliberately, and from behind it a voice said, calm and close, "You shouldn't be here." Ethan froze. That voice wasn't from the radio this time. It came from behind the door. Close, human. But the words were wrong, like they were spoken through water. He backed up, flashlight trembling in his grip. The handle turned one last time, then stopped. Silence. He waited, not breathing, staring at the door as the light in his hand flickered. When nothing happened, he slowly turned toward the elevator again. Its indicator was still dead. The call button glowed faintly red, steady, not blinking. He pressed it once. To his shock, the doors opened. Inside, the elevator was empty. Still. The faint hum of power returned, like the sound of something breathing in its sleep. He stepped inside quickly, pressing G again and again. The doors closed. The elevator jerked once, then began to rise. Relief hit him like air after drowning. He exhaled, shaking his head, mumbling to himself. Bad wiring, that's all this is, bad wiring. The display blinked back to life. B2, B1, G. Everything normal again. Then mid-ascent, it stopped. The panel lights flickered once, twice, and the floor indicator froze. Halfway between B1 and G, he felt the air thicken inside the cabin, that strange cold returning, heavier this time. His reflection in the brushed metal walls seemed off, not quite mirroring his movements. He raised his hand slowly. The reflection lagged half a second behind. Then it smiled. Ethan stumbled backward, hitting the control panel. The lights dimmed to a dull orange. From the intercom above, static crackled to life again, faint, breathy. He could hear someone whispering, low, like a conversation just out of reach. "Don't leave." He slammed the door open button, the alarm button, anything. Nothing responded. The whispering stopped. Then, a soft ding. The door slid open. Except, it wasn't a floor. It was concrete again. That same unfinished basement hallway, but stretched, warped somehow. The lights inside the elevator cast a longer shadow than they should have, like the space outside was bending. He took one step forward. His boot echoed longer than it should have, like the sound fell down a deeper pit. Something dripped in the distance, steady, wet. He tried his radio again. "Control, are you hearing me? Anyone?" Only static. Then the whisper again, louder this time, closer. "Why did you come back?" He spun, shining the flashlight toward the dark. The beam hit concrete, then metal. A figure was standing halfway down the hall, facing the elevator, too far to make out a face, too still to be alive. "Who's there?" Ethan called. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the overhead bulb above it flickered once. When it came back, the figure was gone. He aimed the flashlight around desperately. Nothing. Then the radio hissed again. Basements closed for a reason. He felt his stomach drop. He knew that voice. It was Martin, his old coworker who'd transferred buildings last year. Except Martin had died 6 months ago. Heart attack, night shift, same tower. "Martin?" Ethan whispered. No answer. The elevator dinged again behind him, drawing his attention. Its lights were pulsing now, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. He turned to go back in, and stopped cold. His reflection was still standing inside. But he was out here. The reflection tilted its head, opposite direction of his. Then it stepped closer to the doors. Its eyes looked wrong, too dark, too deep. He whispered, "What are you?" The reflection raised a hand, palm against the inside glass. Then, with an almost human grin, it mouthed, "Go down." The elevator doors began to close on their own. Ethan lunged forward, jamming his arm between them again, but this time the metal didn't stop. The panels pressed hard against his shoulder, forcing him back. He gritted his teeth, pushing with all his strength. The doors hissed, then snapped shut. He slammed the call button again and again. No response. The light went out completely. Then, faint mechanical whine. The elevator was moving. He pressed his ear to the cold metal door. It was going down. The hum deepened, rattling the walls around him. He could feel it through the soles of his boots, like something massive shifting below. He backed away slowly, breathing fast. His flashlight started to dim, the beam flickering in and out. Then, the dripping sound stopped. Total silence. And from behind the elevator doors came a sound like footsteps, slow, heavy. Inside the shaft, they rose one by one, echoing through metal, until they were right on the other side of the door. Then a soft knock. Once, twice. He whispered, voice shaking, "What do you want?" The answer came immediately. "Company." The elevator dinged one last time, and the doors began to open. Ethan raised his flashlight, but there was nothing inside. Just the elevator. Empty again. He took one step forward, then another. As soon as both feet crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind him. The lights went black. The elevator dropped. He screamed, grabbing the handrail as the floor fell away beneath him, a weightless plunge through darkness. His radio tumbled from his belt, the static filling the small space. Then, as suddenly as it started, the fall stopped. The lights flickered back on. The floor display read only one thing. He was somewhere that wasn't a floor. A low hum filled the air, almost like breathing again, louder this time, closer. The mirrored wall rippled slightly, as if something were pressing against it from behind. Then, slowly, a handprint appeared on the glass, fingers long, thin, not his. The whisper came again, directly behind his ear now. "You shouldn't be here." He spun. Nothing. Just the empty elevator. Then faintly, the display changed. A new floor number appeared, one that didn't exist. B3. The elevator began to move again. The elevator slowed. Ethan braced himself, breath ragged, flashlight shaking in his hand. When it finally stopped, there was no ding, just a dull metallic sigh, like the machine was tired of pretending to be normal. The doors parted a few inches. Cold air leaped through the crack, air that smelled old, like rust and wet stone. He forced the doors wider and stepped out. There was no hallway, just a long concrete tunnel lit by a single flickering bulb that seemed to float in midair. No signs, no pipes, no exit. He aimed his light down the passage. The beam reached maybe 30 feet before dissolving into shadow. He could hear water dripping somewhere far away, echoing like it came from under the earth. "Hello?" His voice barely made a sound. It felt smothered, like the air itself didn't want noise in it. He started forward. Each step landed too loudly. His own footsteps came back to him an instant late, like someone was following a beat behind. When he stopped, the second set stopped too. He turned around. The elevator was still open behind him, but the inside was dark now, as if the light had been swallowed. And on the metal wall where his reflection should have been, he saw only blackness. Something scraped in the dark ahead. A slow drag across concrete, then whispering again. Many voices this time, layered and distorted, repeating one phrase over and over. "Go back up, go back up, go back up." He wanted to. Every part of him screamed to run back to the elevator, to slam the buttons, to get out. But the sound of those voices felt like a command, and some stubborn piece of his fear refused to obey it. He stepped deeper into the tunnel. The floor sloped downward now. The flashlight beam jittered over stains on the wall, dark streaks, like water or maybe something thicker. His boot hit something soft. He looked down. A work boot, half buried in dust. He lifted it slowly. Inside was a tag from the same security company he worked for. Then he saw the name patch, half torn but still readable. M. Hart. Martin's. His old co-worker. The radio on his shoulder crackled again. Only this time, the voice was clear. Martin's voice. "I told you, the basement's closed for a reason." Ethan spun toward the sound, but it wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from the dark, from ahead, from behind, from inside the walls. He ran. Boots slapping against concrete, breath echoing, the flashlight bouncing crazily across the tunnel. Behind him, metal screamed, like the elevator doors were grinding shut again. He sprinted toward that dim bulb, desperate for an end, a door, anything. When he reached it, he realized the bulb wasn't hanging from a wire. It was floating, flickering inside a cracked glass panel embedded in the wall. Below it, a rusted elevator door. Different one, older, marked with a faded sign, Sub-Level 3, Archive. His finger trembled as he pressed the call button. The doors moaned open. Inside was darkness, thicker than before. He leaned forward just enough for the light to catch the edge of the floor, and froze. There were footprints, dozens, pressed into the dust, leading inside the cab and vanishing at the far wall. Each one ended halfway through the metal, as if the people who made them had simply walked into the steel. The radio hissed again, then another whisper, closer than it had ever been. "Your turn." Ethan backed away. No, I'm done. Something grabbed his wrist. Cold, thin. He looked down, but there was nothing there, just the pressure tightening around his arm, pulling him toward the elevator. He fought it, kicked, screamed, but the invisible grip was stronger. The flashlight fell, spinning across the ground and casting wild shadows up the tunnel. For a split second, the beam caught the figure from before. Pale face, hollow eyes, mouth slightly open, as if trying to breathe air that didn't belong here. It was inches from him. He lunged backward, tore free, and stumbled into the open elevator instead of away from it. The doors slammed shut. Instant black. He pounded the panel. Any button, every button. The elevator shuddered once, then began to rise. No floor numbers, just the sound of cables whining, machinery straining like it hadn't moved in years. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Then, ding. The doors opened. Daylight spilled in. The lobby, empty, silent, normal. Ethan stepped out slowly. Everything was just as it should be. The chairs, the reception desk, the potted plant that always looked half dead. Only one thing was off. The clock on the wall read 3:11 a.m., exactly the time the elevator always opened by itself. He turned back toward it. The doors were still open, waiting. Inside, the reflection of himself was there again, smiling faintly. Then the power flickered. The lobby lights blinked out, and when they returned, the elevator was closed. He quit the next morning. Building management filed an incident report. Security guard found unconscious near South Tower basement entrance at 4:08 a.m. No injuries. No signs of forced entry. Footage reviewed. The official log described what the camera showed. 3:10 a.m., Ethan approaches elevator. 3:11 a.m., doors open, elevator empty. 3:40 a.m., doors close. No one recorded entering or exiting. When he woke in the break room, Ethan insisted he'd been inside for less than 5 minutes. He refused to speak about what he saw beyond that. 2 weeks later, maintenance sealed the basement level completely. But the motion sensor inside the elevator still trips every night. 3:11 a.m., exactly. They say ghosts haunt places that repeat the same routine. Maybe it's not the spirits that are stuck. Maybe it's the building, replaying what it remembers. Low elevator ding, metallic echo, fade to black. Would you have stepped inside that elevator? Story 2. The woman in the parking lot. The thing about working security at a nearly empty mall isn't the boredom, it's the silence. After midnight, the place feels more like a mausoleum than a building. Air vents hum, cameras whir, and sometimes you hear footsteps that echo longer than they should. My name's Daniel. I worked the overnight shift at the Hillcrest Mall parking complex for almost 6 years. 2 a.m. to 10 a.m., 5 days a week. Just me, a radio, and a bank of grainy monitors watching a dozen gray concrete levels. It wasn't a bad job. Boring, sure, but safe. Until one night, I noticed her. It started around 3:12 a.m. Camera 7B, lower garage, the one that always flickered like the light was tired of being alive. She was walking slowly between the parked cars. A woman, mid-30s maybe, long dark hair, beige coat, clutching a purse. At first, I figured she was an employee from one of the cleaning crews that used to finish late. Except, she wasn't heading to an exit, she was just pacing. Up one lane, down another, never leaving the camera's range. After a few minutes, I radioed upstairs. Unit 2 to control. Got a pedestrian in sub-level 1, you want me to check it out? Static, then my supervisor's voice. Copy that. Anyone else on shift? Negative, just me. All right, take a look. Keep comms open. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the ramp. By the time I got there, the garage was empty. Nothing but the sound of dripping pipes and the hum of those sodium lights that make everything look sickly yellow. I called out, "Ma'am, you need assistance?" My voice came back to me, hollow. No answer. I walked the full length of the lane. No car doors slamming, no footsteps, nothing. When I returned to the booth and replayed the footage, she was gone. The feed showed her walking behind a pillar, and then just vanishing. At the time, I told myself it was a glitch. Old cameras, low light, compression artifacts, happens all the time. But the next night, at 3:12 sharp, she was back. Same spot, same pacing, like a loop. I leaned closer to the monitor, trying to make out her face. Her hair covered most of it, but I could see her lips moving, like she was talking to herself. Then she stopped, turned toward the camera, and though the footage was silent, I could tell she was speaking directly to me. She pointed toward the corner of the garage, the area behind the stairwell where the lights didn't reach. Her mouth formed 2 words. At least, that's what it looked like. "Come here." I blinked hard, looked again, but when the frame adjusted for brightness, she was gone. The space she'd pointed to was empty. The following week, it became part of my shift routine. 3:12 a.m., check camera 7B. Every night, she appeared, never closer, never further, always pacing, always alone. It got under my skin. I started timing her movements, counting the seconds between each lap. 32 seconds one way, 34 back. Perfect rhythm. Almost like she was stuck. Then one night, around 3:20, she stopped pacing altogether. She just stood there, perfectly still, staring toward the lens. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And then, faint through the static of my radio, I heard a woman's voice whisper, "Can you walk me to my car?" I froze. "Control, this is Unit 2. I said, trying to steady my tone. "You reading that? Anyone patched through a second channel?" No answer. Just a soft click, like someone switching frequencies. Then, not yet. I backed away from the console. The woman on screen turned and started walking again, same slow rhythm. But I swear, her head turned slightly each time she passed the camera, like she knew I was watching. That night, I didn't leave the booth, didn't even blink at the monitor until dawn. And when the sun finally started bleeding into the lot, she was gone. Just concrete, cars, and silence. 2 nights later, I mentioned it to a coworker from the early shift, Kyle. He laughed it off. "Saw her too," he said, smirking. "Goes to the parking lot, probably a drunk looping on the same level." But when I told him she asked me to walk her to her car, his smile dropped. "You heard her?" "Through the radio," I said. "Thought maybe the feed picked something up." He didn't say anything for a while. Then quietly he muttered, "You shouldn't go down there again. That's where it happened." "What happened?" He sighed, rubbed the back of his neck. "Woman got attacked, back in 2014. Employee from a jewelry store. Came out late, guy followed her from the stairwell. They didn't find her until morning." I felt the back of my throat tighten. "Was she?" He just nodded. "They never caught the guy." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The pacing, the time, the way she vanished behind that same pillar. When 3:12 rolled around, I turned away from the monitors. I didn't want to look, but the motion alert chimed anyway. Camera 7B, movement detected. My hand hovered over the switch for a full minute before I finally gave in. There she was again. The beige coat, the hair, the pacing. Only this time, she wasn't alone. In the far right of the frame, almost hidden in shadow, there was another shape. Tall, still, watching her, watching me. I leaned closer to see it clearer, and the feed cut to static. The monitor stayed on static for about 30 seconds, long enough that I caught myself whispering, "Please just come back on." When the picture finally stabilized, the garage looked empty again. No woman, no shadow, just the same gray rows of concrete and cars. I wanted to believe the feed had glitched again, but the motion alert kept pinging. Every few seconds, a soft chime from the console. It meant something was still moving down there. I grabbed the flashlight and my radio. I told myself I'd just check the door sensors, 5 minutes in and out. That's what I said out loud, like hearing it would make it true. The elevator rattled as it went down. Each floor buzzed past with that hollow metallic echo you only hear after midnight. By the time the doors opened onto the sublevel, my breath already looked like smoke in the air. The garage was colder than it should have been. All the lights were on, but they hummed unevenly, that low electrical flicker that makes you think you're hearing whispering. I stepped out, radio pressed to my shoulder. "Control, Unit 2 checking sublevel 1. Motion alarm still active." Silence. Then the faint crackle of a voice. "Copy that, she's right behind you." My hand went numb. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. Nothing. Just the empty lane stretching away. I stared at the radio. It was tuned to the wrong channel. one we didn't even use anymore. When I switched back, it hissed with static. I started walking toward the pillar where the woman always disappeared. The beam of my flashlight shook across the concrete, catching oil stains and tire marks. The air felt heavier the closer I got, like humidity without the heat. Then I saw it. On the ground, bare footprints. Small, wet, and leading away from the center of the garage toward the stairwell door. They stopped right at the metal frame. And on the handle, faint smears, like fingerprints made in dust. I pushed the door open. The stairwell light was out. Only the emergency bulb flickered at the top, pulsing like a heartbeat. Halfway up, I heard the faint echo of footsteps above me. Soft, slow, a woman's pace. I froze. "Security," I called. "If you need help, say something." The footsteps stopped. Then, just under my breath, a voice whispered down the stairwell, "Not yet." I dropped the flashlight. It bounced once, the beam swinging wildly before settling on the steps below. That's when I saw her. She was standing 2 flights down, looking up at me through the gaps in the stairs. Same beige coat, same hair hiding half her face, but her mouth was open wider than it should have been, like she was trying to speak but forgot how. I bolted, ran up the stairs, burst through the door to the main level, slammed it behind me. When I reached the booth, I locked it and stared at the monitors. Every screen showed static, except camera 7B. On that feed, I could see myself. Sitting in the booth, breathing hard, and behind me, barely visible in the reflection of the glass door, a woman standing inches away. I turned around. The booth was empty, but the air felt wrong, dense, like something had just moved out of it. I switched the monitors off, all of them. Then I sat in the dark until sunrise. When the day shift came in, I didn't say a word. I just pointed at the console. Kyle frowned, rewound the footage, and his face went pale. He didn't tell me what he saw. He just said, quietly, "You should go home." I quit that morning, packed up my badge, turned in my keys, didn't even collect my last paycheck. 2 weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I went back, not inside, just across the street. The lower garage was taped off. Maintenance crews, yellow vests, flashlights. I asked one of the guys what happened. He said they'd found a body wall sealed behind a maintenance panel near the stairwell. Female. Mid-30s, beige coat. They figured she'd been there for years. I didn't say a word, just nodded and walked away. That night, out of habit, I checked the mall's live security feed online. Most of the cameras were offline, but camera 7B still showed the same corner of the garage. Empty. Still. And then, right as the clock hit 3:12 a.m., the motion alert symbol blinked red. The feed flickered once. For a single frame, I saw her again, standing in the same spot, looking straight at the camera. But behind her, blurred and shadowed, was someone else. A man this time. Tall. Still. And for a moment, I could swear she smiled. Story 3. The motion alert inside the warehouse. The motion alert first went off at 2:17 a.m. I was in the control room, sipping burnt coffee and half-dozing through another dead shift when the console chimed. Motion detected Zone A, Aisle 17. At first, I didn't think much of it. This warehouse, old, drafty, 3 football fields long, was full of false alarms. Rats, fluttering tarps, air vents kicking on. Sensors were ancient, like everything else here. Still, protocol said I had to check. So I looked at the monitor for Zone A. Nothing moved, just the neat rows of stacked shipping boxes stretching into darkness. I rewound 10 seconds. Still nothing, except maybe one small detail. A crate near the back seemed a little off-center, like it had been shifted a few inches since my last round. I frowned, rubbed my eyes, and told myself it was a trick of the camera angle. Then the motion alert chimed again. Same zone, same aisle. 2 minutes later. I'd been working security for almost 15 years. Shopping malls, offices, hospitals. This job, though, was different. The building was massive and nearly empty. Only 2 of us on the graveyard shift. Me on floor patrol, and Frank in the control booth upstairs. He was in his 60s, retired cop, always chain-smoking near the monitors. We'd joked that the place felt like a maze built to hide something. Half the lights flickered. Every sound echoed too long, and no matter how many times you walked it, you always felt watched. I radioed Frank. Zone A tripped again. You see anything? Static for a second, then negative. Feed looks clear, could be the HVAC kicking dust. Copy that, I'll take a look. My boots echoed as I walked down the loading ramp and through the side door into the main storage floor. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on concrete, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. Rows of shelves towered over me, stacked with brown boxes, shrink-wrapped pallets, and the occasional flickering bulb dangling on its last breath. Aisle 17 was near the far end, where the cameras had the worst blind spot. Most guards hated going down there. Something about the acoustics, your own footsteps always sounded one step behind. I turned the corner, sweeping my flashlight across the aisle. Nothing. Just hundreds of identical cardboard boxes labeled Storage, 2019 Inventory Hold. I checked the ground for footprints, only mine. But then, about halfway down, I noticed something odd. One of the boxes was slightly turned, pushed out just enough to create a narrow gap between the stacks. And behind it, a faint reflection, like light bouncing off metal. I leaned closer. My radio hissed sharply with static. Then, clear as if someone were standing right beside me, a whisper came through. "Keep walking." I froze. My throat went dry. "Frank?" I whispered. No answer. Just that low white noise hum. I lifted the radio. "Frank, if that was you, don't..." Another voice interrupted. "Not Frank. Don't stop now." I spun around, flashlight sweeping wildly down the aisle. Nothing there. No movement. But I could hear something. Faint, steady, like breathing behind the stacks. I backed away slowly. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but my training, and maybe my pride, kept me from running. I wanted proof. Something I could show Frank, or at least convince myself I wasn't losing it. When I reached the end of the aisle, I turned off the flashlight and crouched behind a pallet. Waited, listened. At first, just the hum of the lights. Then soft shuffling. Something or someone moving boxes, deliberately. One drag, one scrape, then silence again. I crept closer, keeping low. When I peeked around the corner, my stomach dropped. The box that had been turned was now gone, shifted all the way to the opposite side of the aisle. There was no sound of footsteps leaving, no sign of movement on either end. Just rearranged boxes, as if someone had done it while I blinked. I keyed my radio again, whispering, "Frank, you reading me?" A pause, then, "Yeah, you're still in aisle 17? "Affirmative. You seeing any movement on your end?" "No, feeds look empty." Boxes moved again. "Someone's down here." Frank's tone changed. "Copy that. Stay put. I'll review the footage." I waited, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every shadow between those crates looked too deep. Every drip of condensation from the pipes sounded like a step. Then Frank's voice came through again, quieter. "Ray, you're sure you're alone down there?" "Pretty damn sure." "Why?" Static. Then, faintly, "Because on the playback, I can see your flashlight beam, but not you." My blood ran cold. "Say again?" "The light's there. Moving. But you're not." "What the hell does that mean?" "Maybe bad feed. Just get back up here." I turned toward the aisle's exit. Halfway down, my beam caught something that hadn't been there before. A sleeping bag, wadded up between crates, half hidden under a tarp. Beside it, food wrappers, a plastic bottle, and an old phone with no battery. I reached down, touched the sleeping bag. Still warm. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the far end of the aisle. I killed the flashlight instantly. The darkness was suffocating. So thick it felt alive. The footsteps kept coming, one after another, pausing every few seconds. Like whoever it was listening. I backed into the narrow space between pallets, heart hammering, barely daring to breathe. Something brushed against the cardboard just inches from my face. And then a whisper, so close I could feel it against my ear. "You shouldn't have found this." The whisper was so close I felt its breath on my skin. But when I spun around, there was only darkness. The air had changed, thicker, warmer, as if someone had just exhaled behind me. My radio crackled to life. "Ray, what's happening? You there?" Frank's voice was thin through the static. I pressed the button, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Someone's down here. Moving between the crates. I'm not alone." "Copy that. Stay calm. I'm locking the external doors and calling the police." But the moment he said that, the footsteps started again. Faster now, scurrying between the shelves like a rat too big to be a rat. Boxes thudded in the distance, something metallic clattered to the ground. And then, silence again. I flicked my flashlight back on and swept it across the aisle. Every box was slightly out of place, shifted, angled, as if rearranged by unseen hands in the dark. I turned toward the sleeping bag again. Something beneath it was bulging, like there was something inside. Heart pounding, I crouched and pulled the fabric open with the end of my flashlight. Nothing, just an old jacket and a handful of nails, all laid neatly in a row. Each nail had been filed sharp at the tip. A faint clang echoed behind me. Something metal hitting concrete. It came from the end of the aisle, the far corner where the concrete wall was half collapsed from old repairs. I aimed my flashlight. There, a small hole, maybe 3 feet high, leading into complete darkness. At first I thought it was just a crack in the wall, until I noticed the footprints around it. Bare footprints, small and muddy. The hole went down, like a tunnel. "Frank," I whispered, "there's a breach in the foundation. Someone's been digging under here." Static. Then, "Ray, get out. Right now. Police are 5 minutes out." "No, I need to see where it goes." "Ray, don't be stupid." But I was already lowering myself to the ground. The tunnel smelled like rust and wet wood. The dirt walls pressed close on both sides, barely wide enough to crawl through. Every breath echoed weirdly, like the sound was being swallowed by something deeper inside. I shone my light ahead. The tunnel curved left, then right, then opened into a small, hollow chamber. Inside were stacked boxes. Warehouse boxes dragged down here and arranged like furniture. There was a mattress, a lantern, and on one of the boxes a torn photo of the warehouse exterior, taken from across the street. Someone had been living down here. Watching. My light flickered, and in that flicker, I saw movement. Just a glimpse. A figure crouched in the far corner, skin pale, eyes reflecting the beam. Before I could react, the light died. The sound that followed wasn't a growl or a shout. It was whispering. Fast, overlapping voices like multiple people murmuring in unison. "Go back, go back, go back." I scrambled backward, kicking up dirt, heart slamming. My hand hit something hard, a bone. I didn't stop to see if it was animal or not. I just crawled until the tunnel opened back into the aisle, gasping for air. When I stood, the warehouse was pitch black. The overhead lights had gone out, the hum of the machines gone. Even the radio was silent, dead static. Then, a faint sound from my right. Soft steps, too close. I turned, flashlight trembling in my grip. There was nothing there, just open space. But the motion sensor light above me suddenly blinked green. Motion detected, aisle 17. It wasn't me. I hadn't moved. That was the breaking point. I bolted down the aisle toward the emergency exit, stumbling over crates, heart thundering so loud it drowned out everything else. Behind me, quick scraping steps. Someone following, not running, just walking fast enough to stay close. The exit door was 20 feet ahead when something heavy crashed behind me. I spun around just in time to see one of the pallets tipping over, boxes spilling like an avalanche. And there, between the falling shadows, a shape, tall, thin, barely human. The beam of my flashlight caught its face for half a second. It was covered in grime and streaked paint, eyes wide and unblinking. Its mouth moved, but the sound that came out wasn't speech, just a hiss of air. Then it stepped back into the dark. I slammed through the exit door into the freezing night. Frank met me outside, shouting, but I barely heard him. The police arrived minutes later, sweeping the entire warehouse. They found the tunnel. They found the makeshift bed, the wrappers, the nails, but no person. The forensics team said it looked like someone had been living there for months, maybe years. Moving through the aisles, through holes cut between pallets, a network of crawl spaces built from the inside out. The part that got me the most? They found a hole leading up through the floor, directly beneath the control room, right under Frank's chair. I quit the next day, couldn't go back inside, couldn't even drive by the place. But for weeks after, I kept getting notifications on my phone, motion alerts from the warehouse system that was supposed to be deactivated. Always the same message, always the same zone. Motion detected, aisle 17. When the company finally sealed the building, Frank sent me one last photo, a still frame from the last night's footage. In it, I was standing near the exit door, looking terrified, flashlight raised. But what chilled me wasn't me. It was what was standing behind me in the doorway, a faint, human silhouette, blurred, almost transparent. And in the corner of the frame, on the dusty floor, a fresh set of muddy footprints, leading back toward the tunnel. Would you still take that job after seeing those tunnels?